Hi, my name is Lucy. I've worked as a UX designer for many years. I started off working with startups across various industries, and more recently I've moved into more of a consulting role. And something that I've found while working with larger clients is that their UX maturity can vary. So quite often you'll encounter clients who conflate UX with UI design, and if they think, you're just choosing colors or deciding design patterns, they'll ask why can't devs do this at the very end? But anyone who understands UX understands how much of an impact it can have on business results. And moreover, they're going to understand that the earlier the UX input, the higher the benefit that's going to be realized in terms of things like reduced technical debt, increased user adoption rates, and so on. So in this session, I'll outline a typical 1 to 2 week business analyst style discovery session template with a difference. So this template is going to cover the activities that you'd expect to find during a standard business discovery session, but they'll be augmented by some highly practical UX considerations. And we'll also share a link to this template so that you can copy it and edit it for your own needs as required. So let's get started. Now, what is discovery? I think most of us are familiar with this double diamond design process. And the discovery stage is really there to ensure that we can develop a combined understanding of the problem space and move forward with good ideas to build a good solution. It lets us explore ideas, early and often to ensure that ultimately we're building the right thing before any investment in development takes place. And we can run this obviously on a whiteboarding tool like Miro. So how long a discovery session takes can vary depending on the activities you want to run, but generally it's feasible to run between 1 and 2 weeks with some good organization behind the scenes. And there's no hard and fast rule for who participates in discovery, but BAs and UX designers should usually work together to determine who might gather the best value for their role from the various activities. So BAs might want to interview members of the client team, whereas UX designers work with end users. So pre-discovery, what do we want to do? So on our preparation checklist, we can determine the roles required and any essential participants. We can determine if any sessions have been performed, and if so, remove those activities. Distribute any existing research and documentation, and also present the client with a list of the discovery activities and ask them which ones they want to perform. It's important to highlight that it's not a good idea to cut out any UX heavy activities because this will really affect the end user experience. And we can also run a Business 101 session to give the whole team a high-level overview of the day-to-day activities of the client. Ideally, this will be a subject matter expert from the client side. And in this session, we can cover the business background, acronyms, team structure, and various other things that might help us understand the project a bit better. Once we're finished preparing for our discovery, we can move on to our discovery activities. Now you can set some time aside to help participants learn about Miro, and we can copy out these little playgrounds here just to help the users, learn the interface. We can give them about 15 minutes each. And we can also do a simple icebreaker if we want to establish some rapport between the participants of the discovery. Then we can move on to the more serious activities for our discovery. So we'll want to do stakeholder mapping, and here's where we map out any key players who will be participating in the discovery session. So we'll have our core team, like our project manager, UX designer, and anybody who's involved in the discoveries. They may not participate in all sessions, but they'll be around. And then anybody who we need to keep informed. So this could be our project sponsor, for example. Then we can move on to the product vision. So this is really just mapping out a long-term mission for the project. And it helps keep everybody on track and, reinforce the goals of the project. We can then move on to identifying our user types. So in this activity, participants will identify all the intended key users of the project and the roles of these users and any relationships they might have with other users. So we'll list our user types here, and each participant in the discovery session will have 3 votes. Green will be the user they think is most essential, orange is the next, and red is the least. In the end, the users with the most green votes will be determined as essential to focus on. The most orange votes should be considered, and those with the most red votes should be always kept in mind. Now, if we take a look at our user personas, based on the user type exercise, we should generally include all the users that have been selected with green votes and selected users with orange votes. And there's no need to include the users with red votes unless someone wants to make a very specific argument as to why we should map those users out. So for each persona, we can include a name, a description, and potentially a photo if we want to. When we'll work through their actions, motivations, and pain points. So what does the user do? Why do they do it? What do they want? And what's stopping me? So these are the pain points of their current process. We can work on their values, the context where they're using the app. So that's where are they? What's their day-to-day? Where does the application fit in? And then in terms of very specific UX considerations, we can write out a scenario, again, that just maps out the day-to-day life of the user. And this can be very helpful in inspiring empathy. It can help anybody looking at the personas really relate to the user we're discussing. We can highlight any unique disabilities or needs. So where the user might need a little bit of extra assistance due to, we'll say, cognitive difficulties, if they require screen reader software. Any personality traits. So for example, if they're easily frustrated, if they're an anxious person, we want to consider that when we're designing for them. And their preferred technologies. So for example, if an older user would prefer to make a purchase on a laptop rather than their phone, if the user is primarily using social media like TikTok, for example. And then we can decide what our response is going to be. So we'll see, is there anything we need to validate about these personas, anything we don't know about them, and what do we do now? And it's important to note as well that as a UX activity, we really need to consider more specific points than just the little, actions, motivations, pain points that you'll see here, in case we need to make any special allowances for users. So we want to see personal preferences, like are they comfortable sharing personal information, what their personal aspirations are, these kinds of things. And then we can move on to our user interview preparation. So user interviews, as I think most of us know, they're very helpful for gaining realistic insights into users' needs and pain points, and also to validate any assumptions we've made about users, including while we're creating our personas. Any interview should usually include a facilitator to ask questions and a note taker. We need to make sure participants know they're not being tested or quizzed. This discovery activity should be used to identify interviewees and questions we really want them to answer. And then we can update this section with the interview dates once we know them. And also afterwards, any potential links for notes and maybe recordings. With recordings, you must always ask the user if they're comfortable being recorded. And if they say no, we need to honour that, and we can simply record any notes that we've made here. With UX considerations in mind, we should think really of keeping all of our questions very, very open-ended and allowing users time to expand on anything that they really feel like they want to discuss. We should never cut a user off if they're giving a little bit more information than we expected. We should give time for that. And we should also focus on how the user is feeling, and we'll cover that a little bit more in this user interview guide. So when conducting user interviews, we want to ensure these interviews last no longer than 45 minutes. And this is to respect an interviewee's time and avoid fatigue, because interviews can be quite tiring. And as we discussed, questions should be limited, and we should leave some time for users to elaborate if they want to. And to ensure that we have ideal kind of UX insights gathered, we need to apply empathy at every question. So we can follow up if the user seems frustrated when they're describing, a particularly slow loading screen. We want to ask them, how do you feel when that happens? And we can take all of these notes here and then gather all our observations. And then with our kind of overall observations, we'll break these out into any common themes that we see. We can then move on to gathering our non-functional requirements. Now, sometimes non-functional requirements are those that they affect the end quality of the product. And sometimes, UX doesn't need to focus on all of these, but it's very important. We concern ourselves with areas like, accessibility, usability, and maintainability. So if we look at the significance of non-functional requirements with UX in mind, we should always prioritize accessibility. So this is, if the user has a disability, are they able to access, just as they should, as everybody else is able to access the product or the service. And then usability considerations are very important, and obviously maintainability. So this is, can we continue to build on the product once the product has been delivered? Are are the developers, able to continue building on what the UX designer has handed over. So we can work through these here and kind of highlight any particular usability concerns, issues with potential issues with maintainability and with accessibility. And then finally, we can move on to user journey mapping. So journey maps can vary very widely in the kind of details they include, but the simple purpose is really just to help everybody visualize the process that the user undertakes to achieve their goal. And from UX perspective, it's very, very important to incorporate any emotions and stressors. So we'll see here, how is the customer feeling at each stage of their journey? And this is very important to identify when the user might need help. So this helps, determine why they might be calling customer helplines, these kinds of things. And we want to ensure that we kind of maximize the mental well-being and also the success of the user in achieving their ultimate goal. So we can outline the identified key steps of the journey here, the actions that the user takes at these stages, any needs and pain points that they're experiencing at that time, the touch points. So this will be the elements of a service they interact with. Are they contacting you via phone? Are they, performing an action via desktop? As I said, how they're feeling at those stages. Any opportunities where we could improve the UX and, reduce frustration, and also process ownership. So anybody on the team who's going to, really own this stage of the user journey. So this template overall should give you a good idea of how to run a discovery, gather all the business insights that are required, but ensure that at every stage of the discovery session, we're bearing in mind the users and the end result. And this will always result in a fantastic user